All right, we're live. So today we're going to try to get through, I don't know if we're going to be able to get through all of what I have planned. Hopefully we'll have more discussion than me just talking. But last time we met on Mill, we went through the first introductory section, and we ended with basically his what's known as his harm principle. So he thinks that one of the main questions that he's dealing with here is what is the limit of authority? What is the limit of physical force or power that we can exercise over individuals in a civilized community? Okay, so he's got a bit of a, you might say, politically incorrect these days. We kind of skipped that part too last time. The end of chapter 1, he says, that maybe despotism and having a dictator is appropriate for savage people, but we civilized Europeans, we don't need this. The government should never intervene on our behavior because we have evolved and we're civilized people. Let's just assume, forget all that sort of chauvinistic European stuff. Let's just say, people in general have this liberty. At least he says that we do. We're not really going to get into the metaphysics of that. But even if we're not discussing, free will and determinism and whatnot, we can talk about liberty in terms of political ability or social liberty. How can we move throughout society? What are we allowed to do? Or are we not allowed to do? And when can the government intervene? And not just the government, he even talks about other people and social pressure and such like that. And he establishes, this is where we ended with his harm principle, that basically, as long as you're not harming anybody else, you're cool. So, if you can harm yourself even. As long as you're not harming anybody, then you're good to go. And I'm not going to scroll back. I'm just going to read the passage because we went over this last time. We can just start here. And really what I want to kind of go over and discuss, I'll read a few quotes from chapter 2, but what does he mean by harm? How does he define harm? Is he right? Is there something he's overlooking? Is there something maybe that because of technology, because of the way we've advanced as a society, something that's different about the points that he's making? That's sort of where I'd like the discussion to sort of veer. But let's go ahead. I'm going to read the passage from the introductory chapter, or at least just the little section of it where he gives us the principle. And he says that the principle is that the sole end for which mankind are warranted, individually or collectively, in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number is self-protection. That the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. Right, so that's the principle he lays out. In chapter 2, he turns to this issue of liberty of thought and discussion, because immediately the question might rise, well, what about, what do you mean by harm and harming others if I say something or I discuss a topic that, I don't know, hurts someone's feelings or offends them? Maybe offends their religious beliefs or it offends their political beliefs. Would that be harmful to them? And if so, then could I censor their speech? Is censorship okay, given his principle of harm? He claims that is not the case, but he understands that's not obvious, that's not really obvious. It's like, well, why do you draw the line with words? Can't you argue that that's harmful, that words can harm you? But he says, no. The freedom of the press, or as he called it, liberty of the press, is, he doesn't use this word, I was about to say sacrosanct. It's the sacred value that is just as important as civil liberty. So look, I'm just reading the opening lines here for chapter 2, and then we'll elaborate a little bit and see if we can get some discussion going. So he says, the time it is to be hoped has gone by when any defense would be necessary of the liberty of the press as one of the securities against a corrupt or tyrannical government. I guess he's just stating right at the outset, the purpose of having a press is to guard against tyranny. People in charge have to have something to check them. And this is the function of a press. And that's what the liberty of the press is there for. So no argument, we may suppose, can now be needed against permitting a legislature, an executive, not identified in interest with the people, to prescribe opinions to them and to determine what doctrines or what arguments they shall be allowed to hear. So again, he seems like pretty much an absolutist when it comes to this. And I guess I kind of am as well, but I'm going to try to bring up some examples throughout this discussion that are pretty, I guess, kind of controversial, and even someone like me, who I guess I'm kind of with him on this. I'm a bit of a free speech absolutist. There's some examples where even I'm sort of, scratching my beard and scratching my head, and I'm not really quite sure that there are definitely some. When we get to like the issue of cyberbullying, for instance, we'll talk about this, but he seems to be of the opinion that, look, if you're a civilized human being and you're raised in a society where you get an education and, you're given the sovereignty of individuality to act as you will, then you should be able to hear whatever opinions that you would like to hear, right? Any information, you shouldn't be protected from facts, or even lies, even deceptions, right? You should be able to make your own choices, I guess, is sort of the point. Let's skip forward here. I want to read a little bit more. So few lines down, he says, let us suppose, therefore, that the government is entirely at one with the people and never thinks of exerting any power of coercion unless in agreement with what it conceives to be their voice. But I deny the right of the people to exercise such coercion, either by themselves or by their government. The power itself is illegitimate. The best government has no more title to it than the worst. It is noxious or more noxious when exerted in accordance with public opinion than when in opposition to it. If all mankind minus one were of the opinion, actually, let's pause there for a second. Actually, I'm going to read this whole passage. Let's pause there for a second. So what he's saying here, right? Even if I have a good government that is at one with the people, and they're trying to spread really good information, that even that, he seems to think, doesn't give them the right to censor, that they should basically let the press say whatever they want. So that this right is absolute. It extends to both, even if, I guess, even if I'm in North Korea, right? Obviously, you live in North Korea, you're like, man, they need a free press because they need to know, they're brainwashed. The ruler, if any nation needs a free press, but then you might assume, oh, well, but we have a government we can trust. Maybe not, but maybe you could assume we do. But even if we do, he says, we still need to hear dissenting voices. We still need to hear dissenting voices. And even if somebody is completely wrong, right? This is the next passage, this is where I stop. Even if one person disagrees with everybody else, that doesn't give us the right to stamp out their voice. We should let them speak, or at least, give them the freedom to say what they want or think what they want. So this is where I left off. He said, so, and I'll just read from the screen here. I'm looking at my book. Where did I leave off? He says, the best government, if all mankind minus one were of the opinion, and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would no more be justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. Were an opinion of personal possession of no value except to the owner, it would be obstructed in the enjoyment of it. Were it simply a private injury, it would make some difference whether the injury was inflicted only on a few persons or on many. But the peculiar evil of silencing the expression of opinion is that it is robbing the human race, posterity as well as the existing generation, those who dissent from the opinion, still more than those who hold it. If the opinion is, actually, let me pause there though. He's going to answer why, but he's sort of putting this out there on the table without saying why. He's going to answer why in the next sentence there. But what he just said there, that if we silence this, let's say there's one person that disagrees with everybody else about a particular thing. How are we robbing mankind by silencing them? He says, we're robbing the human race. We're robbing posterity as well as the existing generation. Why? How so? Like if somebody believes something that's completely like, what if it's wrong? Like how would I benefit from hearing a bad opinion? How do I know I'm right about things? Well, yeah, go ahead. What are you gonna say?
So I guess the opinion is who's saying what's right. You know, what's right for you may not be right for me. And so I guess I'm confused. Is he saying that we should have all of the opinions? Like we shouldn't
Yeah,
take
no,
away that
we
one
should.
differing opinion?
Well, no, he's saying that we should basically be open to hearing, or we should at least allow people to express whatever opinion they want, and we shouldn't silence them. We should be able, if they want to say something, they should be able to say it.
Oh, I have to agree with him on that. I mean, what would be the point if everybody exactly, said the same thing? I mean,
right, yeah, and so you're kind of getting at, I think, part of the benefit, right? So if everybody agreed, this in a way, this kind of turns us into, this leads us into some epistemological concerns. I hate to use such a fancy word, but epistemology is the area of philosophy where we ask questions about knowledge. How do you know what you know? How do you define knowledge? And when you have an opinion about something, right, when you believe something to be true, what is the basis for that belief, right? Do you believe something because you've looked into the evidence and you've looked at the evidence and you've thought of different theories that were plausible and you decided that this one was the right one? Or do you believe it just because everybody else believes it? In the first case, it seems like your knowledge is much more firmly grounded. If you know why you believe what you believe. Okay, I could be wrong. I know I'm fallible, but here's why I believe what I believe. Here's X, Y, and Z. This evidence compels me to draw this conclusion. Okay. But if you say, well, I believe it because everybody else believes it, everyone agrees, don't you? Well, how strong is that? He doesn't think that's very strong at all. And so for him, if we never let a belief be challenged, then even if it's right, it's not really built on anything solid. It's just built on consensus, the fact that we happen to agree. And so this is where I left off. He says, so it's, he's robbing the human race. If you don't, even if the guy's an idiot and he's got the wrong opinion, we still want to hear it, because he says, if the opinion is right, we're deprived of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. That's the obvious case. Okay, so maybe he's right. There's been times in history where most people were wrong about certain things. I mean, there was a time when most astronomers thought that the Earth was in the center of the universe, and that all the celestial bodies revolved around the Earth. And when Galileo and Copernicus and all, when they came out, they were thought of as fools. How dare you challenge this, you idiots? Well, it turns out they were right. So, and we know this. We know that we've been wrong in the past, so we could be wrong in the future. So maybe this guy, even though he's, he or she, this individual that has this dissenting opinion, maybe it doesn't seem right because we're so used to thinking otherwise, but they could be right. And so if that's the case, this is the obvious benefit. We can exchange our error for truth. But even if they're wrong, he says we benefit. Because it says, if wrong, they lose what is almost as great a benefit, the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by its collision with error. So again, back to my example, if you believe something based on X, Y, and Z evidence, this reasoning, I was explained by a scientist, this scientific issue, now I understand it, and I understand how they figured it out, and now I know why it's true, versus, oh, I learned it in class and smart people told me. Or, oh, everybody in society believes it, so I believe it because everybody else agrees. That's weak. That's nothing, right? But if we've been challenged, if our beliefs have been challenged, and we've engaged with other beliefs and explained, well, now we know why our beliefs are true. Now we know why, and they get strengthened. So either, like he says, we find out we're wrong and we can change truth for error, or we're more sure of our own beliefs, and we know we're better grounded in them.
I was
yeah, go ahead.
going to add that if you expect to be able to say your opinions or your thoughts about something, you also have to listen to other people's thoughts about that as well. But then also, you know, say if someone has the wrong opinion, it can actually help you, I guess, further solidify, I guess, like give you like more arguments of why you are right.
Right.
And then, you know, say if they're the ones that are actually right, they might bring up certain points that you haven't thought about before as like a general overall conversation. You know, it can either benefit you. I mean, to me, it benefits you either way,
Right.
listening to other people's.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's saying, it's a win-win situation. You know, either like, you know, even if they're wrong, like you said, that's a good point, that they might have brought up an objection to your argument that you never thought of before. And you still have a reply, you know how to reply to that objection. But now, and maybe, and this might actually, this maybe has nothing to do with philosophy, but just for your social life, it helps you understand people better. I think that's one thing. We tend to have knee-jerk reactions, and when people don't agree with us, we think they're either an idiot or, you know, we paint this sort of stereotype. So we talk to them, we like understand, like, well, okay, now I know why you think that, but here's where you're wrong, you know, and here's where you're mistaken, and that sort of thing. And like you said, you might not convince them, they might still like push you away, but you'll understand at least a little bit. You'll have a better perspective, a broader perspective on the issue. I think it'll strengthen your view. Yeah, definitely. You know, and he says this at, you know, the next paragraph: we can never be sure that the opinion we're endeavoring to stifle is a false opinion. If we were sure, stifling it would still be an evil, right? So, you know, he brings this point up throughout the chapter, right? That we are fallible, you know, that human beings are capable of making mistakes. And yeah, I was just watching this video on YouTube. I just popped into my feed and I was watching it this morning. It was pretty interesting. I can't remember all the details, but it was they were talking about a certain fallacy of false cause, and they were talking about how what was it called? I forget the name of the disease, but I think it was called bedridden fever. When women were in labor, after they had childbirth, they would get fevers and die. It was like very common back in like the 1700s. And there was one doctor who came up with a theory. He said, well, all these women that are dying of this fever, they all have inflammation in their abdomen. And so that's what's causing the fever, is the inflammation. And so this other doctor, I think Oliver Wendell Holmes, said, no, it's not that. What's happening is all these women that are dying, you're doing the autopsy on them, and then you're going and delivering another baby, and you're spreading bacteria. You need to wash your hands. And all these doctors, like they were like, oh, how dare you blame us? Oh, we are not dirty. We don't need to clean our hands. You know, it's just like, how dare, we're infallible, you know, we're smart doctors, you know. But this guy Oliver Wendell Holmes made all of his doctors, surgeons or whatever, do this. And I think like the deaths from bedridden fever went down to like 1%, from like 80% to like 1%. You know, so it's like we have this sort of arrogance, this sort of pride, you know, like we're just like, oh, it couldn't be me, you know. And it's like, and think about it too, this is one thing that's really, you know, obvious with the fallacy. It's like, okay, so the inflammation is what causes the fever. Maybe the fever causes the inflammation, and even if the inflammation caused the fever, what, just inflammation just happens, like it's just is like, what, you know, you're not really explaining anything, right? But I think people, you know, they need to be challenged, you know, even if they're on the right track, you know, even if maybe there's a correlation between the inflammation and the fever, there's a correlation, but not a causal relation. And so, yeah, the more opinions we hear, the more perspectives that we get, you know, the more, how does he put it? Truth collides with error. And as truth collides with error, that strengthens truth, I guess is his theory here. That's what he's hoping for, ideally will happen. You know, I've got a lot marked here. I don't know if I need to read it all, because you guys are saying such great stuff that you're kind of filling in all the gaps. But he says, so he says, first, the opinion which it is attempted to suppress by authority may be true. Those who desire to suppress it, of course, deny its truth, but they're not infallible. They have no authority to decide the question for all mankind and exclude every other person from the means of judging. To refuse a hearing to an opinion because they're sure that it's false is to assume that their certainty is the same thing as absolute certainty. all silencing of discussion is an assumption of infallibility. Its condemnation may be allowed to rest on this common argument, not the worse for being common. I hate to bring this up because I'm going to post this video on the internet and I don't want it to get taken down, but I almost feel like this is the way, like, I feel like the way that people are treating this whole COVID epidemic is that the mental health professionals, and I don't blame them, I don't think it's their job to be PR people, but the way that they talk to us peasants who don't understand medicine, just to me comes off very condescending, and it's very much like appeal to authority. And look, maybe they're right, and maybe they know what's best for us, but telling us that we're idiots or that we don't care about anybody is not really a good way to engage. I think, give us the reasons, show us the scientific evidence, present the arguments. Don't just say, well, I have this designation, I have this title, so therefore I'm right, and just shut up. That's
they do tend to say like the people aren't wearing masks, or the country's blah 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 isn't doing this. Like they are part of the people,
right?
And then also like being in a like nursing major, like I understand how this is transferring to other people. I understand where it like why it is so like it's just going to everybody, like how it was created and like how it's going to other people and everything like that. Yet they're like, I don't want to say dumbing it down, but they're almost dumbing it too down and saying like, you need to understand this. It's like, no, we got it, but tell us why. It's like why this is so important. So
right, yeah. I mean, in a way, I somewhat sympathize with I guess scientists, healthcare professionals, like, because they kind of have to dumb it down. You can't really, you can't use medical jargon and things like this. And also, too, I think that we've gotten so divisive and combative, and everybody, because the internet, everybody's an expert and everybody can kind of look this stuff up. So it's like, I feel like scientists are kind of forced to say things like with more certainty than they really have. But it backfires on them, when they talk with such certainty, and then they have to change their mind later. It completely, it undermines their claims. And so, yeah, I think it's a tight rope to sort of walk. But if I were in their shoes personally, I guess it's easy for me to say because I'm not in their shoes, but I would think just to be open and honest. And when I come out and say, look, given the information so far, here's what we know, here's how effective masks are. Another thing that really bothers me too is the way that the news sensationalizes the numbers, I've heard this fact being thrown out that if you're vaccinated, or if you're unvaccinated, you're 88 times more likely to be hospitalized. Yeah, that's true. But you know what the percentage is? Okay, if you get COVID and you're vaccinated, you have a 0.01% chance. If you're unvaccinated, you have a 0.89%. So it's still less than 1% chance. They don't say that in the headline, that 88 times more likely, because it's like, yeah, but it's still less than 1%. Like, it's still very unlikely. It's, we've kind of got it under control now, but that doesn't sell news articles. It doesn't, it's not, sensational and scares people and gets them to click on the link. But I think it's irresponsible. I think it's irresponsible journalism, But on the other hand, it's like, do you censor that stuff? What do you do? I'm of the opinion, I'm kind of like with him, I'm sort of a free speech absolutist. But on the other hand, I don't know. Like, I'm thinking of like some cases that I had in mind that I wanted to discuss today. Some of them are kind of old. I can't even remember the name of the young lady, but there was a cyberbullying case it was maybe 10 years ago. It was I was pretty new to teaching. I think I'd only been teaching a couple of years. So it must have been like 8-9 years ago. But it was a horrible case. This young woman, I think she was like 16 years, high school age, committed suicide. It turns out that one of her classmates had a mother. So this older woman, this mother of one of this lady's schoolmates, came up with a fake profile on Facebook. as a boy, like and like a real cute looking like Calvin Klein model, like boy band looking, and bullied her, told her she's ugly and you're never gonna get a boyfriend, you're gonna die alone, and very just mean to this young lady. And so it turns out, that she ends up committing suicide. Well, the parents of the girl found out about the mother doing this and sued her, or trying to take her to court for murder, try to accuse her, you murdered our daughter. It was your cyberbullying that led to our daughter committing suicide, and so you murdered her, basically. There was a case about 2 years later, I think, it was a relationship between, I think, a boy, a 20-something-year-old boy, and I think the girl was like 19 or 22. They're about 2 or 3 years apart. He was a little older, but he did the same. He was very they broke up, I think, and he harassed her online and talked her into killing herself, and then she did it. And so I'm wondering, like, what's the solution here, right? There's a lot of parents out there that are like, we have to silence people. And, again, the parents of this young lady, they sued the woman for murder, which I mean, as horrible as this person was, I still think that was a bad move. I mean, you work in law, Andrea, and I think that was they were asking a bit too much to charge the woman with murder. That was, I think maybe if they would have, I don't know, what would be a better charge against that woman? Harassment, or I don't know.
Well, I think the problem that we see, like the two sides, like I'm always a little bit torn. People who have bad behavior, there's never any repercussion. It's kind of like the girl who cried rape, guy goes and spends 10 years in prison, and then 10 years later she comes forward and says, you know what, I'm really sorry, I lied about that, you can let him out of jail.
Yeah.
So I think that we are a society, we like to see, it's probably why some states like the death penalty so very much. Like we like to see an injustice,
eye for an eye,
righted. Yeah. And so, I mean, you see several of those cases, and, we want the driver of the car who robbed the bank to be just as culpable as the bank robber, right? So in situations like that, we want those people to be, treated as criminals, like, even though the law doesn't necessarily define that. I think there was another case of that more recently where a girl and a guy, they kind of dated, and she kind of toyed with him and, basically convinced him to commit suicide. While he was in the car, he had somehow rigged the engine, the fumes from the engine. And she talked to him, texted him the whole way, talked him all the way through, just do it. You want to get back in the car. And they did charge her. I think they charged her with manslaughter.
I was going to say, manslaughter, some endangerment or something like that. Mm-hmm. But to go for the murder charge, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm guessing that'd be a tough case. You'd have to basically start a precedent with that one.
They did get a conviction, which I was kind of surprised.
I was surprised too. I'm surprised that, yeah.
Because I mean,
it's hard to prove that. It's hard to prove. It's so subjective and psychological. There's not, like, I guess the only physical evidence would be like the messages, text messages.
And you have 3,000 messages saying just kill yourself. You want to. Right. That's a tougher go. But I mean, you talk about the COVID stuff and about having an opinion. How do you think that all of the platforms that are censoring the information, and I'm not saying whether you should wear a mask or shouldn't, or you should get vaccinated or you shouldn't, but the information is definitely skewed. I mean, they made our health a political agenda item.
Yeah, I hate to be cynical about it, and man, I probably get the video taken down for this. Like, I just think because a lot of the main media outlets they're not owned by the pharmaceutical companies, but some of their major advertisers are Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and they're not going to be critical of them. I honestly think that's
very connected.
Yeah, they're very connected,
intertwined.
Yeah, and I think it's also become political because, like I think because Trump is such a firebrand. That anything he says, you got to disagree with it, no matter what. If you're on the left, you have, so I think any theory that sounds anything like he might have said it, they're just, oh, no, that's no, he said it, don't even look at that, But honestly, I think that it backfires to me when you do that, because I think people, when they see this, they're like, why are they shutting up all these, views that don't really seem they seem pretty innocuous, you know, some of them. I mean, I can see some, maybe like I could see somebody taking down a video of, I don't know, like how to make a bomb, or maybe like how to cure COVID, and it's really actually dangerous and it's like a poison or something like that. But if somebody's just putting a theory out there, you know, or whatever, to me, it's when you suppress it, that is not helpful. If anything, it feeds the flames of those people that already believe it to begin with.
I don't,
You know?
COVID's just like one example. I mean, you
Right.
have clients who get online and they can learn how to make meth. They can learn how to
Right.
build a bomb. They can, we have a whole sect of people that believe the earth is flat. They call them the flat earthers, right?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
to be so select in what they decide to take down or not take down, I always kind of feel like, I relate it to a jury. You were talking about dumbing things down. I don't know that you can really ever put that out there quite like that, because you can't assume that the people aren't going to get it. It's just like assuming in a jury, we'll dumb it down for you so you can get it. They don't like that. Juries aren't stupid. They can connect the dots, so I mean, I think that I don't know that I like to be treated like that. I think
Right.
I mean, I certainly don't think you need to use 50,000 giant words, but I also think that you need to most people in this day and age, they can get it. They can connect the dots on it.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't use that phrase, and maybe Kaylee was right to hesitate to say it herself. I think, like you said, there's a balance, right? You don't want to come out. I think some people, like I was watching this political commentator this weekend, what's his name? He's a professor at Georgetown, but I'm like, dude, you're trying to speak for the common man. And I'm like, man, I can understand you, but that's because I have a degree in philosophy. He's using all these big words. And I'm like, you sound really smart, but I bet half people listening to you can't follow you. And I think that's stupid. But on the other hand, you don't want to be like dumb it down so much. And I think that to me is what the media has done with the whole COVID thing. They've dumbed it down so much. They treat us like such children that it's insulting, to me. And I also get angry. This is the other thing. I'm kind of with you. If you want to get vaccinated, not vaccinated, mask, no mask, I'm kind of neutral about all that. But a lot of my friends on my Facebook, I can't even go on there because a lot of they're very left leaning, and they get so sanctimonious and so judgmental. And they're like, if you don't get vaccinated, you're hurting other people, you're harming other people, you're selfish. And which I mean, please explain that to me, because I really don't understand that. Like, I don't understand the logic. This does kind of relate, right? Because he's saying if you harm others, the government could step in. So if they're right, then I guess the government could force you to get vaccinated. But what I don't understand about that argument is, I thought if you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, you can still get it and you can still spread it. So, and in fact, a lot of countries like Israel, Taiwan, they have the highest vaccination rates, and they also have really high, they've had these high spreading events. So I don't understand the argument. Even when I was a kid, I never understood that. Like when adults would be like, oh, these people that don't get vaccinated, they're so selfish. I'm like, well, I could see you saying that they're stupid, or they're reckless, or they don't care about their own health. But I thought vaccines were supposed to protect you and make you immune, or at least, when you get it, the symptoms are mild. So if anything, like, they're not being selfish, they're just being reckless is a better word than selfish. If you want to chastise them for anything, I wouldn't chastise them at all. It's their body. What they want to do with it, they want to take that risk, they can. And if you feel like you want to be protected with the vaccine, then you can do that as well. But again, like, maybe I don't understand how vaccines work and they've been explained to me wrong, but I thought that if you didn't get one, that it didn't really harm the other people that did get one. It just made you more susceptible to it. But,
I don't know, the whole vaccine thing, I mean, the political stuff to me, would I say that I'm probably a more conservative leaning person? Yes. But I think that I also am smart enough, and I'm inquisitive enough to be able to read and say, look, who's the best person for the job? I mean, you'll never just see me vote a straight line down a ticket because, I want to be, one side or the other. I really do think the best person for the job is kind of the most important thing for me. Everyone does it differently. But I also, when you start to read some of the science and some of the other things that aren't on a main news, that it's not just on Fox News or CNN News, I think it's interesting to see both sides of the story, especially in the European countries. When you talk about like Israel, India was another one that people were questioning, like what is going to happen, and I think we're just entitled to all of the information. And I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's okay to ask the question. I think it's, people should be able to do that and not feel like they're going to be torn into pieces. Because right now people are just volatile and they're mean and they're just, they'll shred you.
It really boggles my mind, and it scares me. It really scares me, because I feel like, look, if you disagree, that's fine, but why do you have to act like the person you disagree with is evil? That is not constructive. I was watching this piece on Eric Clapton earlier today, and he apparently had a very bad reaction to the vaccine, which does happen. It's rare, but it does happen. And he had a really bad reaction. And this commentator was showing like all the liberal media reacting to him, calling him racist. He's a anti-vaxxer. And he says, I'm not anti-vax. He's like, but this information needs to go out. Like, I want the vaccines to be better. I'm not anti-vax. And this guy was like kind of a comedian, the commentator. He said, that's like somebody goes to Chipotle, eats a burrito and gets sick and complains about it. And they say, you're anti-burrito. It's like, no, like, I just was pointing out I had these bad side effects, and like maybe your cook didn't wash his hands, or but you just bring it up and they immediately just jump on you. And I think that this is not healthy. This is not healthy. That they are suppressing information. Anything that's negative about the vaccines, they'll suppress it. And again, like, we should know this. Even vaccines that we've had forever occasionally have side effects on certain people, on certain populations. You shouldn't demonize those people. That's because
it's kind of interesting, the history of vaccines. Like, there was a case, I think it was 1920. So the precedent that the Supreme Court is using about your vaccines talks about a case from a pastor who had a really bad reaction to a small prior vaccine. And so then the smallpox vaccine had come about, and he didn't want to take it, and he didn't want his son to take it because he had had bad reactions previously. And so he was going to have to pay a $5 fine. So he had to go. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they said, no, you have to get it. Your reaction, like what is good for you. Basically, it's just about what's good for the whole, not what's good for you. We don't care. And then that case ended up going to a case, I think in 1927, where a girl was put into an institution because she ended up getting pregnant. And so the case that was cited for precedent to the later case was the vaccine case. And they said, it's basically what's good for the whole. And they ended up involuntarily sterilizing thousands of women. And so if you go now to the Supreme Court, those are the two cases that they're going to cite, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. But swine flu came about, 27 people died from that vaccine when they first started it. And because of that, they shut it all the way down.
Yeah, and that's funny.
People.
I'm glad you mentioned that swine flu thing, because that was another thing that was a part of this piece I was watching this morning. They were showing this liberal commentator, I won't mention her name, but they showed her chastising Eric Clapton. Like, I can't believe him. He's evil. He's racist. He's homophobe. How dare he question the vaccine? And they showed a piece, the same woman a few years earlier when Trump was still in the White House. And she was like, don't trust these vaccines. Gerald Ford, when he was in office, pushed them through in the swine flu, and 27 people died. And this is irresponsible. How dare we trust Trump's evil vaccine? And it's like, so when Trump puts it out, it's like, look, I don't like Trump either. Look, I honestly don't like any of the presidents I've ever had in my whole lifetime, but that doesn't cloud my judgment of seeing objectively. Like, I can name a few good things that every president has done. And I find that, like you were mentioning earlier, some people just watch Fox, or they just watch NBC, or they just watch CNN. They don't watch anything else, and they think they're informed. You know, they think that they know all this stuff, and they're like really they're usually the most condescending people, you know, and they're like, oh, Travis, you don't understand. I'm like, yeah, actually I do. Like, I watch the BBC, I watch Al Jazeera, I watch the Israeli news, I sometimes even watch the Chinese news, and that stuff's like, you can tell it's all propaganda, but at least you kind of can see, what are they trying to get, what story are they trying to tell, right? And I think you kind of have to do that these days to really get, and even then, I feel like you have to sort of approach everything with a little bit of skepticism, you know, because you know that all these news outlets, a lot of them have some sort of agenda, you know, they have, or at least a narrative that they want to tell.
Yeah, but I think Mills was totally right. I mean, the point to be made is really, you know, that old saying about, you know, screaming at me louder doesn't make your argument any more right, right? Do your homework, you know, have a little something behind why you believe what you believe, you know, instead of just saying, well, you know, you believe it. And, you know, the COVID has brought out, like, I feel like COVID has been a really good experiment in social human behavior, you know, about how it drives fear, and people who have like gone, you know, way left and way right, and they're not okay. Like, mental health is a real thing, you know, you see a lot of depression, anxiety, child abuse, obesity, like everything has just kind of been
that's another thing that bothers me about the way we're, yeah, there's a group of scientists who have come out. I forgot the name of this report, but there are hundreds of scientists that basically said the lockdowns did more harm than good. And I don't, yeah, and I don't know any major news outlet in our country that has acknowledged that. They all are suppressing that. They don't want you to know that. The only reason I know about that,
yeah, they're just starting to come out with some statistics about that. I think the first one I thought I saw was about 6 months ago. It came out of Arizona, and the statistics are saying, you know, by taking away, especially kids,
children, I know, years of their life.
The obesity rate has gone up, the child abuse rate has gone up, the suicide rate has like quadrupled for kids between like 10 and 13. You know, we took away their friends, we took away their sports, we took away, you know, and so then, you know, kids just basically sat at home, got depressed, and couldn't deal with it. I mean,
they were already on the edge to begin with, you know?
Yeah. I mean, teenagers are kind of like human. They're just like legal terrorists. Okay. I've raised 2 of them. And, you know, when they turned 18, I'm like, you didn't die. So, you know, go to therapy. I don't know what to tell you. But anyway, I mean, I think it's just a really interesting kind of human experiment to see how people react to stresses, you know, that are kind of brought upon them by no doing of their own, right?
I hope we learned from the experiment. I agree with you. I think that we can learn a lot from the way we reacted, but my worry is that given our track record, as far as at least how we organize society, the way our government works, whatever solution they come up with is probably going to make the problem just worse or kick it down the road. I hate to be the pessimist here, but you know, that's what I'm afraid of. But I have a feeling, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong about that. I hope I'm wrong about this, but I think that historians are going to look back 100 years from now and look at what we did and see this as a really big mistake, that we really overreacted, and it was, you know, like I said,
I think we could have just managed it better. I'm old, so I don't care as much. I mean, the fallout isn't going to be to me. Like, hopefully I'll be dead by then or whatever. But like the kids who are just starting college, or like my kids that, you know, 18 to 25, you guys are going to feel it.
Yeah, no,
you
this
know,
is
down the road.
Yeah, I would say this is a very morbid, depressing thought. I almost hesitate to say it, you know, but before this happened, you know, I had a bucket list. I was like, man, I want to do all this stuff. But after it happened, I was like, you know, I still have a bucket list and I still want to do all this stuff, but I feel like I've done a lot. And I'm kind of grateful that I was able to travel through Europe when I was in my 20s. I was able to see the world. And now I just feel so bad for, you know, you're talking these, you know, people that are younger. And I'm like, shit, I hope the world changes drastically and gets a little better, because I just don't think it's fair. Like, you know, I as much as I crap on millennials and Gen Z, you know, I think it's not their fault. You know, they inherited a really bad hand, and you know, I feel for them. I used to think I was lame. You know, Gen X. I was born, you know, 79. And when I got into punk rock, I thought, man, I wish I was born in the 60s or 70s. Like, it's lame. The 90s is lame. I thought the 90s sucked. But looking back, I'm like, man, like, it was cool. Like, I'll take that. I got to see Nine Inch Nails and Nirvana. Okay, I'm cool. Like these kids, like I hope we pull things together. I really do. I think we can, but it's divisiveness and this tribalism. And like you said, I think Mill's right about this. We need to be open to other viewpoints and not just react and just jump on each other, disagree.
I'm a little sad for the younger generations because I got to travel, a lot, and I got to see a lot of things. And I think that the freedoms and accesses that we had, they won't have. Right. I mean, there's so much, the rigid rules and it just seems like more and more and more kind of, we're shrinking the freedoms that we knew back in the day, right? And so it makes it tougher. I mean, we would probably all be in prison if there was,
that's funny.
And
I always say that, like, I joke and my students always freak out, and I'm like, it's really true. I'm not exaggerating. Like, all this stuff that I did when I was in high school and even like middle schools, I kind of started getting in trouble, I guess 7th or 8th grade. I was a juvenile delinquent. And if there was cameras and cell phones and stuff, I heard some story in Austin. This was, years ago. They arrested a student. The cops went to campus and handcuffed this student in front of all the other students because she was truant, because she had skipped so many days of school. Like, that's just ridiculous. Like, when I was in high school, I went to court. I had to go to court for truancy. And I had to like do all this community service. I was a bad kid. I was, in trouble. But the cop, they're going to give this kid a criminal record. I mean, it's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. I think that, like you said, kids are supposed to be stupid and make mistakes, and like, we're not letting them do that. And everything that they're doing is, I think we mentioned this last time. I don't know if it was you and I when we were talking about Simone de Beauvoir, or last week when we were talking about Mill. We were talking about how, when I was a kid and you got in trouble, your principal, your teacher, you better behave because this is going to be on your permanent record. And we all knew that was bullshit. Like when I'm getting a job and when I'm 38, they're not going to look at my, but it kind of is true now. Like if you post something on social media when you're a kid or whatever, it's up there on the internet. Like, it kind of does stay on your quote unquote permanent record too. It's still not to the extent that they say, but still. And I think a lot of these kids don't realize that, they're young, they want attention, they want likes, and they put stupid stuff up there, not realizing that, 10 years down the road, that might cost you your livelihood or a good job or something like that. So
we see it all the time. I mean, I have juvenile clients all the damn time. Yeah. And I'm like, stop putting it on Snapchat. And you might we know you're going to do it. Just don't put it out there.
Yeah.
It's never helpful. And right. every time they do. So I don't know. I think it just comes down to, even though they think they're more free, I think they've lost a lot of the freedoms we had just because of how society is now. It's a cultural thing.
I've always thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've always thought it was interesting how they say like, oh, like the kids are safer now because of like all this tracking and things like that. But then I feel like there's a lot of creeps out there now that can track your phone, see where you're at. And like my mom went backpacking around Europe. And I told her I wanted to do that because I thought it'd be cool to like follow her journal and like do the same steps that she did. And she was like, I will never, ever let you go to another country. I don't care if it's Europe by yourself anymore, just because of how things are now. And she's like, and she, would stay at hostels and everyone was friendly with each other. But now it just seems like the world isn't as safe, even though we have all this technology to try to keep us safe in a way. So I thought that was always interesting that we can't just go out anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, in a way, I haven't been to Europe in a while. I think last time I was in Europe was probably 8 or 9 years ago, but maybe even longer. I honestly think that all that stuff is bullshit. Like, I think that's just hype. Like, it's no more safe or less safe. And I think it also has a lot to do with that stupid movie Hostel. And things like that, pop culture stuff. Like, if you know what you're doing, you go to like, if you go to like, what is it? Hosteling International USA, it's like a nonprofit. If you go to one of their one of their preferred. If I were you though, being a young lady, I probably would go with a friend. I don't know if I would go by myself, but I think your point still stands though, because they talk about, oh, it's safer online. At least, I'd much rather them online than out in the park where some pervert's going to get them in the park, but honestly, maybe it's even easier for those creeps to get them online. My sister, her nephew just graduated high school. My nephew, sorry, her son. So my nephew, he's going to college now, but we were talking, and she was telling me that there's this problem that these at their high school of the young women there. None of them are dating the men, the kids. Like, they don't date the boys at high school. They all have these sugar daddies, and a lot of them are getting arrested. They're getting arrested. They'll be picking them up across the street, across the high school. These like 30-year-old dudes or whatever. Like, and it's a big problem. And they're meeting them on, these girls will go on Tinder or whatever, or one of these dating apps, and they'll lie about their age or whatever. Because I think you have to be 18 or over to be on one of those apps. But like you said, like, this idea that all these sort of precautions can be put in place to sort of keep us safe. In a way, that's an illusion. Does it really keep us safer? And another issue is, how safe can we be, really? And is there a limit, right? It seems like let's say you're living in North Korea and you never disagree with the dictator. You never, everything he says you do. You're probably gonna be pretty safe. How free are you gonna be though? Right? How much liberty are you gonna have? So it seems like there's a trade-off, like Andrea was saying, this is what I lament about this new generation, is that you don't have this freedom. And I think it's a lot of that is predicated on your safety. We've got to keep you safe from the evil terrorists, from the COVID, whatever. You're never going to be 100% safe. The world can never be 100% safe unless, you live in some sterile room with iron bars around you or something like that, and armed bodyguards or something, right? But who wants to live like that? There's I think he's a psychologist, is his field of study. Jonathan Haidt is his name, and he does a lot of work on
maybe.
Okay,
am I there?
Oh,
am I back?
You froze up for a while.
Okay. So I was talking about Jonathan Haidt. He's a child psychologist, early childhood development. And he talks about how human beings are anti-fragile. And since about the 1990s, there's this sort of helicopter parenting phenomenon that's happened where, when I was a kid, when I got home from school, my dad would give my sister and I some snacks, and then he'd say, go outside and play and get back before sundown for dinner, and we would just go run through the neighborhood. Now that doesn't happen as much. Kids go home, they sit in front of the computer, they play video games, whatever. They don't go out and explore. Another thing, there's not a lot of independent play. Parents will let their kids play, but there's always an adult supervising them. So anytime there's a bully or someone being mean, mommy, daddy, elder, come help me. And he says that's not healthy, because they don't learn how to interact socially. They don't learn how to empathize with others. That there's a certain thing, we're anti-fragile. If you protect us too much, we get weak. You don't want to abuse the child, right? Just throw them to the sharks and let them figure it out. But on the other hand, if you completely shelter the kid from every possible, harm, you're really actually not doing them good in the long run. That they need to learn how to deal with adversity. And I think that's a big issue, a big problem that I guess does tie into this, are we harming these children by not letting them get harmed a little? That's kind of a paradox in a way, but it's, let them fall down, let them make mistakes.
I think we always see the pendulum swing, especially in parenting, right? We've seen over the past 75 years, it went from really, really harsh to like, now we're in like bubble wrapping the kids. And, I think it's because I do work with kids who have come up, some of them in the foster care system, and then I usually end up with them in a criminal case at some point. And I have one girl that I've always kept in touch with, and she was a foster care kid, and her grandma raised her, and then she turned 18, and they said, well, you're out of the system. So she went back to the home that they took her away from, right? Where else was she supposed to go? So then she got in trouble, and she got in a felony. And then, I told her, I said, look, you got to stay out of trouble. We are not going to be able to get you a sweetheart deal again. So then she goes and shoots a girl because that girl talked to her boyfriend. And so she's doing a little prison time. So I still chat with her. I video chat with her. And it's really funny kind of how she's growing up. Now I think she's 22. But she's funny because she'll talk about, I wish that somebody would have just let me figure it out, but with a little bit of structure. Like, hey, you can go find whatever job you want, but this is how you fill out a job application. This is what a resume looks like. I think she didn't really have any limits. Wasn't taught. They were basically just housing her, right? It's like storage facilities, and I think she talks a lot about, some of those basic things that she wished she would have been able to learn. Not that we don't want to keep our kids safe, we do, but at the same time, I think it's okay to let them bleed a little bit, right? It gives them tools. It gives them tools to be resilient, and I think sometimes, we see parents enable their children to fail, and so I think it's a balance, but
yeah, it's hard to, I guess it kind of goes back to the point we were talking earlier about, we gotta, you don't want to go too far to one side or the other. Like, again, there has to be some structure. On the one hand, I don't want to completely take away the individual responsibility from the situation, but on the other hand, something you said kind of struck me about taking somebody and showing them how to write a resume, how to fill out an application. I feel like part of it, I don't want to blame society on everything. I feel like people do that too much these days, but our educational system is just, it fills our kids' heads with a bunch of needless, stupid information repetitively, and doesn't teach them practical skills. Like how to do taxes, finances, how money works, what the economic system is like and how it's organized, civics. Like, we don't teach them how to be good citizens. It's just, it was bad when I was in school, but it's got even worse. I think we just dropped the ball. People can't even read or write these days, and they're force feeding them mathematics, and then they can't even do that. You can't even get a kid to give you exact change, unless the computer tells them. It's again, I don't want to put all the blame on the system, this vague, but on the other hand, I hear your story and I'm like, this, you got to let people fail, right? And so they get better at things, they practice, and maybe they get a little humbled, they're not so arrogant, and they get a little character. But on the other hand, they need some direction, right? You don't just, throw them to the wolves and just, see how they do. So I guess striking that balance is a tough thing. If we put this on the level of society, though, this is where I think the issue, if we're talking like we're the government and we have to decide, this is where I'm sort of like, I'm with Mill, but I realize that maybe I'm a bit naive. Maybe it's because I'm a Texan and I used to be libertarian. I'm not quite that anymore, but I still feel like maybe there's a limit. I don't know. Again, that the cyberbullying thing, sexual harassment. The thing is too, I don't think he's not thinking about things like that. He's thinking about civilized individuals having a discussion about politics or policy or whatever. I don't think he's thinking about somebody, making fun of somebody on the internet and hurting their feelings. I think my guess, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but my guess is that his response to these issues would be something like what my mom used to tell me, what sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you, kind of thing. So just sort of, if you're well educated and smart enough, you're not going to have this big ego, and if somebody makes fun of you or says something hurtful, well, you'll just blow them off. It'll just roll off your back. and I kind of like that, but it does kind of sound harsh, you know. It's like, you know, what do I tell the mother of that young lady who killed herself? You know, like she should have just stuck it out, you know, toughed it out. You know, I mean, in a way, I kind of think that's the truth, but that's something that's pretty harsh to say. I almost feel like, to me, when I heard that story of the young lady who killed herself because of a fake profile harassing her, I thought, well, yeah, really crummy lady. What a horrible human being that did that to her. You know, how horrible. But then I also thought, you know, that really sucks that somebody cared that much about what somebody online thought about them that they didn't even know. Why do we live in a society where kids care about that? But maybe I'm being naive, right? I mean, I think, you know, kids are just that way, right? And when they get to a certain age, they really care about fitting in and peer pressure. And maybe I'm asking too much, you know, but I just feel like when I was that age, I don't think I could have ever done that. Wouldn't have, I mean, who knows? But I was always a rebel. I was like, I don't care what people think about me. And that was just, I had hippie parents or whatever. So maybe that's just me. And I'm just being too harsh and not understanding enough. Like I said, I sympathize. It was a horrible situation, but I can't help but think, well, maybe if we lived in a society that gave this young lady a sense of self-confidence enough to where she didn't really care what some stranger said on the internet. But maybe I'm being idealistic. I don't know.
I agree with that 110%. I think that, and I'm probably, I don't know, you might get booted for
Yeah, for
YouTube if I
saying
say
it.
this, like, I don't even know. And I'm sure that they'll disagree with me, but I think that we have made our children too soft.
Yeah.
You know, everybody's a winner. You know, my daughter, she played soccer and we went to state this year as an undefeated team, and we're from like a little town. Okay, we're from Fruitland, Idaho, and we won state. And you know, we played a game in Oregon, so I'm right on the border of Oregon and Idaho, and I'm like, what's wrong with the scoreboard? And she goes, oh, Oregon has a no mercy rule. I go, what's a no mercy rule? Like, I don't get it. You know, and she goes, well, if we get over this many points, they just stop counting the points because we don't want to hurt the other team's feelings, right? So you can't, you know, these are high school students. And so my concept is, you know, we're up here, we're at this level. Okay. You know, you guys may want to get to or have an opportunity to play at a collegiate level soon, right? You play to win. Okay. You play your best. If you're not playing enough, practice harder. You know, I feel like we've taken these kids and we've put this little puffy cloud around them, like it's all going to be okay. And at some point when these kids are adults, or God forbid something happened to their parent, and you know, they have to figure it out.
Yeah, they're not going to
have to,
yeah.
You know, if you have to be able to have the tools, right, and the foresight to be like, okay, I can get through this. You know, if what do I need to get some help? How do I do that? Do I need to, you know, talk to my friend? But they just melt down and stop functioning.
Right.
You know, they're 35 living in their parents' basement. Right. And I'm like,
yeah, they've got to you. You're not going to develop any coping skills unless you've had to cope with something, you know? And so like, yeah, I think that's a great point. It kind of, and in a way, I guess it ties into what he was saying earlier about never hearing views that you don't agree with. If you're never exposed to anything and collide and argue, then that doesn't strengthen your view. But you were talking about this team. This reminded me of an interview that I watched of, I forgot the guy's name, but he was Mike Tyson's coach. And what he said was maybe not fair. I don't know. Mike Tyson might have issue with it, but it was an interesting point that he made. He said that Tyson never won a fight. And I think it was Joe Rogan was interviewing him, and he said, what do you mean he never won a fight? He won a lot of fights. He was a world champion. And he said he never fought anybody until Holyfield. He never fought anybody that was actually a challenge. Every fight that he won, he knew he was going to win it. Like, he was that good. But the minute he actually had to face somebody that was on his level, he buckled down and he freaked out, and it was kind of sad. The interviewer was talking about Mike Tyson's childhood, and he was very poor, and it was kind of a small kid that got beat up and bullied. And he mentioned this and said, when he was in the match with Holyfield, that little kid came out, because that was the first time. Every other fight, he knocked them out, like first round, just punch them, bam, they're dead. But the minute he had to, so he never really won. You didn't really win. And so I think losing is actually winning in a certain sense. You have to lose a few times because it shows you what you need to work on. It gives you feedback, right? If you keep winning, you don't really ever get any feedback, and you just think you're perfect. And no one's perfect.
No.
I work at an elementary school, and I could see this every day. We have to change games because one kid, he's over it. He's crying. It's not fair for him because he's terrible at the game. Okay, we have to please him, change the game. So I definitely see all that going on.
Oh, this is scary. This is really scary.
Have you ever heard of the book by, what's your last name? Duckworth. I have it here somewhere. It's called Grit. And she did some studies, because they were wondering how come you have kids. Her first example was West Point, and they start prepping kids for West Point, like in the 4th or 5th grade, right? They get them the tutors, they get them the exercise people. I mean, anything that these kids need, right? And they are the most prepared. Okay, they're going to hit that door with every possible tool. Right. And these are the kids that most often fail. And why? Why is this happening? It's the kids who kind of don't have it all together, and they just kind of muddle their way through, right? They aren't at the top, they aren't at the bottom, they just kind of consistently, and so her concept for her book was how these kids just have grit, right? They just have grit. Like how do we measure that, and how do you give that to kids who don't have it? So it's kind of an interesting concept that we've made kids a little less scrappy these days. They're very fragile. They're very emotional. They're, you give them anything hard and they just melt to the center of the earth.
Wow. Yeah.
And those are the clients, as criminal clients, those are the ones that on a consistent basis, their mommies will call me.
Yeah.
And I have a rule about mommies. I'm like, you got a middle-aged male adult. He gets to adult in jail, so you don't get to call me. But I mean, that's hard,
I remember watching some news story a few years back on, like they were talking about millennials. So I guess it was a while ago. It was before like Gen Z was a label, but they were talking about some people, like they'd be their first job. They'd be at this office, and they'd work there for like a month or two. And then the boss would get a phone call from their mother, and their mother would be like, I think my Jimmy's doing a really good job there, and why haven't you promoted him yet or given him a raise or, yada, 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 whatever. And so, it's like the parents this is a grown man, apparently, is supposed to be, working in the world, and his mommy is going to go negotiate a salary. I'm sorry if I'm, insensitive, but if I was the boss, I'd be like, I'm sorry, but your son is now fired. I thought I hired an adult.
You're telling me that as a professor, you don't ever have moms give you an email like,
I do, but I have a loophole. I don't know if it's in the state of Oregon, but I know in Texas there's a loophole. I can't talk to them unless they fill out a form and their daughter or son signs it. I can't discuss their kids' schoolwork with them. That's against the law. So
Oregon has that.
Yeah.
But, a lot of times a good friend of mine, she runs the criminal justice program at our local college. And she says that the parents will call and sometimes they'll pretend to be the student. So if the students left their, like their password is saved, so they open it up and see their grades or check their work or do whatever. So they'll call and pretend to be the student because they've accessed their stuff. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, but I've considered going to teach like, primary, K through 12, but that's one of the things that really makes me shudder because I talk to teachers and principals and I hear that stuff that back when I was going to school, if I was acting up in class and my parents went to school to talk to the teacher, they were on the side of the teacher, you know, even if the teacher was a dick. They were like, look, I understand the teacher's a dick, but they're the teacher, you got to respect them. You got to be a good student and behave in class. But now the dynamic is completely switched, you know, where my little Jimmy, he's a good kid. I know he wouldn't do that. And you're, you know, and so they take, you know, they take the side of the child, and the teacher's just supposed to sort of cater to their little whims, you know, and to me that's, you know, Plato talks about this in the Republic. He talks about the degradation of society, and this is one of the signs of it, is when the children start ordering the teachers around and act like that the elders have no wisdom to impart them, you know. And there's some truth to that, right? People get old, they get set in their ways, fresh eyes bring new perspectives, but come on, you know, that only goes so far, right? You know, the kids need to learn how to read, write, and add and subtract, and they also need to learn how to deal with the real world, which involves conflict and the conflict of ideas. So, yeah, I don't see why, but this seems to be something controversial now. Mill used to be a philosopher that it was okay to say you liked, but now I know, you know, some of the more woke types, they see him as, and there's some reasons for this, right? If you read the early parts of the essay where he talks about, you know, how he's just talking about civilized people, not savages. I mean, sure, that is a pretty archaic and embarrassing attitude or whatever to other cultures, but, you know, that aside, I think his point about liberty is a pretty good one. But I've heard, you know, some people, they associate, you know, if you quote on liberty a bunch, you're some libertarian white supremacist extremist or something like that. I don't know where that is coming from, but just so you know, that's a thing.
I don't understand why that is, though, because I mean, really, we cannot, it is unfair to judge any writing or anyone's, I mean, granted, there are inherently evil people out there. There are people who just say bad things because they want to say bad things, whatever. But I think that it is important to judge these writings with the perspective of the time.
Yeah.
You know, you can't take my view in 2021. And when was this written? Like 1789, 1859?
1859, yeah.
It's not the same thing, you know. I mean, and I'm not saying it's okay to be racist. I'm not saying it's okay to say derogatory things. That's not my point. But I think if you put yourself in that time period, you know, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's how it was.
Yeah, I think we're asking too much of these people sometimes. I think you're right. I think a good way to, like you said, a good way to do it is don't judge them by our standards today, but judge them by what other people thought during their own time. And I think if you compare his views to his contemporaries, he's pretty progressive, right? He actually, most historians agree that he basically sacrificed his political career defending women's rights. So, you know, he might not have been, you know, as progressive as we would have liked him to be on racial issues and, you know, colonialism and imperialism, but definitely he was ahead of the curve on women's issues, I think. And also, too, I think if we just extract kind of the essence of his argument and forget about the sort of, I guess, the timely aspect of it, but sort of just as the point, you know, liberty should be respected as long as it doesn't interfere with other liberties. I think the argument, and to me, this argument is actually more racist. It sounds more racist to me than his view would be, but their argument would be that, well, the only a privileged class of individuals like Mill, you know, upper class, middle upper class, only people like that have the privilege to talk about liberty and to talk about freedom. And so if he were a member of the oppressed class, he would be more worried about things like economic equality or safety for the workers, you know, and things like that. So only bourgeois, rich, white people have this view. But to me, that's racist, because that's assuming what? So minorities can't be successful and they can't have liberty and can't, be independent. Like, you're telling me being independent and being able to think for yourself is a white thing? Like, to me, that sounds racist.
It totally is racist, and it's a horrible thing to say. But in that time, I mean, we've evolved a lot. I think we have a long ways to go, because I know right now, race is always, really, it's a tough subject for a lot of people. And I feel, like when it comes to race, that, we always need to check ourselves no matter where we're at, but
that reminds me too, like, I hate to bring this up because this is another hot topic, but maybe y'all been seeing this in the news about critical race theory and all that stuff. Now, there's a lot of people who deny that it's even existing, right? So I don't go to school. I don't know what's going on. I think what's really happening is there's a lot of disingenuous arguments going on both sides of the political divide. The people on the left say we aren't teaching critical race theory. That's just a conspiracy theory. And technically they're right, because the dictionary academic definition of critical race theory is something very complicated that you're only going to study if you're a philosophy major in grad school. Okay. And so the people on the other side that are against it, I think what they're against is, because of COVID, a lot of these parents are being exposed to some of the curriculum that their children are exposed to. They're seeing it. And again, I don't know, don't have firsthand experience of this, but I have seen news reports on it, that some of these students are being told that if they're white, they're inherently bad or an oppressor, and if they're black, they're so segregating students by race. And like to me, that this kind of comes back to the essay. If that's really what's going on, I think that's harmful to these students. I think, you might be of the belief or the opinion that that's a good way to, I don't know what your goal is, to solve racial inequality. I don't know, for justice. I don't know what your goal is, but I think that is a harmful paradigm to set. Whether we divide people by race or any other, these are children, they're kids. And for them to be taught to see someone as, inherently this or inherently that, instead of respecting them as an individual for their own individual contributions, to me, this is just a big step back. It's just a big step backwards. And like, if this is what's being taught, I'm against it, Now, on the left, what they're going to say is that we aren't teaching about our true history, that we're covering up all the racial injustices of the past. And I think that that's true. Like, when I was a kid, they talked about the civil rights movement, but we didn't learn about a lot of the atrocities. We didn't learn about a lot of the lynchings. We didn't learn about the killing of Freddie Hampton, and we didn't learn about all that stuff. So I think there is a point that they are making on the left that is a relevant point. Let's be honest about our history. We've done some beautiful, wonderful things. We've done some really ugly things. Let's not just sugarcoat it, but let's not make it all evil either. So if that's what they're saying, I'm for it. But if it's just this, let's brainwash kids into thinking that this person good, this person who looks like that bad, I don't understand how anybody could think that was a good way to raise a generation of children. I think that's just going to increase the political divisiveness in this country. But what do I know?
I think they've gone too far with that. I mean, honestly, between the sex education that they want to teach, and I when I went back to school, I had to take a health class. I'm obviously always the oldest person there, whatever. And so one of the first questions she asked, she's like, "Oh, what are the ways you can get pregnant? We're gonna do a quiz, And okay, everyone failed the quiz except me. And I'm like, y'all, well, you're in trouble. You're in trouble if you don't know how the babies are made, right? So I mean, I think that when
they say someone left the stork left it.
They just didn't realize that if you did it, I mean, that's how the sperm and the egg, like, that's how that traveled. And I didn't know that would actually happen like that. And that would get you pregnant too. I'm like, look, birth control's free. Do not procreate. But I'm just saying, like, I think the school kind of takes it to that next level, right? Where we're I mean, I'm a very kind of calm and basic person. Okay. Go out to the farm, watch how that happens, whatever. But I mean, we've taken, kind of even our history class. I'm a big history fan. I like to read a lot of history, whatever. And my daughter has apparently, and she listens to me because she has no choice. So she's taking a government class as a senior. And she's like, Mom, you should hear the crap they're talking about. I mean, it's like this like frosty, there's no guts to anything they're saying, So, I mean, I think again, the pendulum has swung, right? Where we want to take this hard edged approach to education instead of, being able to have kind of well-rounded, balanced kids, right? And the kids are stressed out and the parents are stressed out. And I'm thinking, holy smokes, like, how are these kids? And Oregon's taken it even a step further. You don't have to be able to read, write, or do arithmetic to graduate now, because we want the minorities to be able to catch up with the non-minority students, right? So the like equivalency test or the standards that we have kept for our students to be able to graduate, those aren't going to exist. And so, now we're just going to shift that burden of bullshit, from, our high school students to, our high school teachers to now our college professors. So y'all are going to have to take it, you're going to have to start down here, and then you're going to say, look, this is a college class. Okay. I don't care if you show up or you don't, like, this is college, right?
Well, I hate to say it, but it's already gotten to that point. I've been teaching a little over 10 years now, and my standards I've had to lower them because of this issue, right? When people get to me, they are not capable of writing, they're not capable of reading, they're not capable of articulating an opinion and explaining themselves. Their communication skills are definitely not ready for college. They're not college level. And yeah, you're right. I pretty much I mean, if I try to get them to learn at the level that I was expected to learn at when I went to college, and this was just 15 years ago, I graduated, I got my bachelor's in 2006. So, if I expected them to do the same work, they couldn't. Maybe one or two of them, maybe three per class. I don't know about Oregon. Maybe it's different there. This is my first semester teaching in Oregon, but I'm just from here in Houston, and it's a pretty diverse group of students, from all backgrounds, upper, middle, lower class, and none of them are very good at reading and writing. They're not college level. They aren't. And something you said to me, it's if you've got statistics that say that a certain minority group is not performing at standard level by the time they graduate, to me the answer is to figure out why and to try to do better and try to teach them better so that they can catch up to those standards, not to lower the standards for everybody else so that anybody can pass. Like, that's just going to screw everybody over. It makes me furious.
I think we're doing a disservice to our younger students.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
It's going to happen.
No, and I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to name institutions, but I've actually butted heads with faculty, with administration. I've had students plagiarize, cheat, and I thought the administration would have my back. Sometimes they did, but there's been times when they told me just regrade the assignment or let them turn in something else, and I'm like, that I never would have even thought of that was a chance when I was a student. Like, if I got caught, for one, I would never would have done something like that. But if I would have been caught doing something like that, I would have been so ashamed. I wouldn't have had the gall to go talk to the dean and demand. I didn't know that copying and pasting an article was plagiarism. I didn't know it was plagiarizing. It's my first semester. Oh, Professor Ross, they didn't know any better. Just be nice and let them get a late grade.
No, see, then again, we're just doing a disservice to them, because then when you don't pay your taxes for 10 years, you could go to jail, right? I didn't know I was supposed to do that every year.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're teaching them that their actions don't have consequences. That when they do
Oh.
something, yeah, when they do something shitty and they don't follow through, then that's okay. We'll just pass you anyway. That's the lesson that you're teaching them. And like
There
you
was
said,
yeah.
that's a disservice. You
There
know?
was a criminal case with a boy who did that, and his defense, he had driven drunk and done a bunch of drugs, and he hit people. I don't know if he went off the road and went in their yard, or people died because of his actions, and that was his defense.
Yeah.
You know what? I just come from a super privileged life, and I just don't think that I should have to do the same concept. You know, I shouldn't have that same punishment, because I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know I would get in trouble if I drove drunk and killed people. I mean, I just had a really, you know, I was a spoiled child.
Yeah, I remember that case. I forget the kid's name, but didn't he get off? It was
Well,
like
he did. I don't think he ended up with prison time. And they said, well, you
Yeah.
can do house arrest and some other things. So his mom took him out of the country, and then they both got popped, and
Right.
he got brought back, and some other things. But I mean, the fact that they would even entertain that as a defense,
Yeah.
you know, we are not helping our kids be better adults,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah. So this conversation is kind of taking an interesting turn. You know, it's like I was trying to like figure out, okay, so I guess we start off, well, what are some forms of harm that maybe would qualify, you know, how we, you know, justify us in intervening and preventing harm. But now we're talking about like maybe we're protecting people too much from harm, right? Or at least the like children, you know. And again, to sort of qualify, we're not saying that you should just let kids get hurt and harmed and physically abused, but again, they need to be exposed to somewhat of a challenge or adversity. And when they do wrong or bad or they fail, they should get a little feedback, you know, and to guide them in the right direction, I suppose. And when one doesn't do that, then I suppose that is actually harmful for society. You mentioned earlier, you were talking about, you mentioned the example of, you know, a woman accuse a man of rape, and 10 years later, she says, I actually, it was consensual and I was embarrassed, and I lied. So, and he gets exonerated, he gets let out of prison. I didn't know this guy, but one of my friends knew a guy that actually happened to this guy. And it ruined his life. It happened to him when he was like, I think 18. He was a senior in high school. And I think the way my buddy told me, he was this punk rock kid. He slept with this kind of cheerleader chick, and when everybody found out about it, she was so embarrassed because she was only supposed to hang out with the jocks. So she said it was non-consensual. And since he was this weird looking, you know, the adults thought he was a Satan worshiper because he wore all black or whatever, you know, and so he goes to jail for like, I think 4 or 5 years. And then finally, when she turns like 24, I think she felt guilty about it and came out and said, I made it up. And so he got released, but nothing happened to her, you know, and I don't think that's right. I mean, you know, I mean, I think if somebody is attacked and that happens to them, that's horrible, and they should have you know, their day in court, and they should be heard, and we should make it easy for victims like that to report these cases. But on the other hand, if they just make something up because of some personal vendetta, you know, or they're just to spite somebody, like, I don't know, maybe there's a better solution, but I think they should get the same punishment that the person they accused would have gotten. You know, if you falsely accuse somebody of a crime, you just made it up, and they go to jail for 10 years, and they find out you made it up, then you should go to jail for 10 years or something like this.
I don't disagree with that. I think that, you know, we have a real sense of kind of invincibility these days, you know, especially our younger generation, like it'll never happen to me. But I think the more important thing is that it takes away from those who are truly raped. You know, it
Yeah.
warps the system for those who truly have experienced a violent crime. Just because all of a sudden they grew a conscience and decided they didn't like their bad decision and it should be their fault and not my fault, you know. So I don't, I like all of the things that we have done to the system to make it better, for women and easier for them to report. I don't think anyone should ever feel shamed or, be embarrassed, and we should have the tools to be able to help someone who has a violent crime. But just to walk away unscathed when you have taken so much of someone's life is just, and those are hard cases to prove. I mean, oftentimes from the defense's perspective, we won't take those to trial. It's he said, she said, and sex is sex, right? I mean, how do you change that? So,
Yeah, I think that's another part of the whole, the nature of the crime itself is such that, like, as you said, it's just it's like one of the worst crimes besides, I guess, after murder. Like, can you think of anything worse? At least the way we think of it. But on the other hand, it's sort of, in many cases, unless there's like some sort of like documentary evidence, it's really something that's hard to prove. And so this is, I think, also why it is so, to me, morally reprehensible when somebody falsely accuses somebody, because it's already, the burden of proof is so tough when it actually really does happen, that when you just make something up, it's going to make it that much harder for the real victims in the future to get justice. So I think that's a good point. It's like really reprehensible. It's like, for your own personal vendetta or, kick or whatever, your hatred for somebody else, you're going to selfishly do this. And if you get found out, this is potentially going to, jeopardize further cases, like the boy that cried wolf kind of thing,
Yeah.
So,
it's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough issue, I think. Yeah, so this is where I don't know if we'll ever be able to resolve or get it perfect. I think the thing that's really disgraceful, I think, about the way we've handled it in this state, in Texas, is that we don't seem to take it that seriously, right? It's since 2009, I want to say, the county has been backlogged, like hundreds of cases backlogged. They have all these rape kits on file that they haven't even gone through, and so it's just a disgrace. But like you said, I think part of it is just that, like, these lawyers don't even want to touch the case because they're like, I don't think we can actually convict. We don't have enough to go on. Sad to say.
Some of those cases they just won't try because it doesn't have enough jury appeal, right?
Wow.
I mean, you're supposed to, as a prosecutor, and I've worked with a lot of very good prosecutors, you're supposed to, I mean, seek justice for the people that you have been elected by. And a lot of them, they just don't like to freaking lose. And they're
Right.
willing to do whatever they have to do to get the win. And so if it's not a winnable case, they aren't going to take it, all the way.
Kind of reminds me of that the story of Mike Tyson. You didn't really win that case. You only take the ones that are easy.
Right.
You don't even know how good of a lawyer you really are.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm looking at my notes here because I want to make sure I cover everything. But there was something else. I think Kaylee mentioned this earlier, and we never really addressed it. And I don't remember how you put it, but you were talking about I don't know, something basically like, well, this was earlier when we were talking about why should I want to hear somebody's opinion, even if it's false? And why should I allow one person to disagree, and all this? And you mentioned something like, well, maybe not everyone has the same idea of happiness, or not what's right for one person isn't always right for someone else. You were going to jump in, Kaylee? You're going to say something? I thought I saw you unmute, but maybe so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I was just gonna say something like, well, if you expect everyone to hear your side of the story, you should be able to hear their side. I think you mentioned a part earlier in the lecture about like not wanting, like, we need to shush those people because they're wrong, but it's like, well, if they're listening to you, you need to listen to them. And I think it actually can create like really complex discussions if you have two people with completely opposite opinions of something. And if like everyone can like keep their cool, you can actually have like a really good conversation, and like, why you believe in this. Well, I believe in this because of this. And like, you can bring up so many different points, and they might bring something up that you've never thought about that could like completely change your opinion about something. But you're never going to know that if you don't listen to someone else's opinion about it. And of course, that comes with being respectful and not raising your voice, and getting angry. But it's like, it's kind of like with the vaccines. Like someone can be like, no, vaccine mandate's wrong. And someone that is like, oh yeah, I'll take the vaccine, no big deal. Or someone that's like, no, everyone has to get the vaccine. Like, I think it'd be so interesting to put all three people in the room and just see their discussion, as long as, everyone keeps their cool. But yeah, I think it's like, if you expect someone to listen to you, you should listen to them.
Yeah, so basically in I guess in light of being fair, right? It's like, well, you want people to hear your voice. That's sort of a Kantian. I think Kant would sort of use that sort of logic, right? Kind of treat people as ends in themselves. You would want to be respected to respect them. This is interesting though, like I think there actually was such an event that you're describing that got taken off the internet. It was on YouTube. I think this Australian news channel, Sky News, did some debate where they had, like you said, someone pro, someone anti, someone in the middle, and it got taken down. So like, that angers me, right? Because again, like, just because somebody's expressing a view doesn't mean they're right. And we want to hear all these sides. We might come to like a view that's different from all three that might combine the best of all, even a better answer or something like that, closer to the truth. And I think you used to see this a lot more in the media. They were sort of forced to do this before, in the 1990s, Clinton passed the Telecommunications Act, or Congress did, and he signed it. But before then, there was the fairness doctrine. So if you were discussing politics with candidates, you had to always give the opposing view equal airtime. But now that's over with. So now you get Fox News and CNN and people that you only get really one side, or maybe maybe a few opinions, but they're all right leaning, or a few opinions, but they're all left leaning. So there's this sort of like illusion of choice or illusion of variety where there really isn't. But this is actually one of the things I think, to me, is kind of problematic about utilitarianism. And I don't think maybe necessarily about this essay, but this essay actually, if you pair this together with his utilitarianism, maybe this helps a little bit. But one of the issues, and so you said something earlier that made me think of this. What's good for me might not be good for you. What's right for me might not be right for you. And I'm not saying this as some like relativist that, oh, there's no truth, it's all just opinion. That's not what I'm saying. But maybe some individual might, I don't know, they might want to live their life a certain way, that if you lived your life that way, it would destroy you. But they live their life that way and they thrive. Like if I live my life the way a gymnast live, an Olympic athlete, right? If I tried to live my life that way, I would probably run out of breath the first day. I work out a lot, but not that much. And so, but that life is perfect for them. There was this. It still is a controversy, I guess. I don't follow sports much. But what is that condition that the football players get? Is it COPD or what's it called? It's when they get concussions and they have brain damage.
Oh, that syndrome that Aaron Hernandez died of.
Right.
Right. They
I think it's.
whacked in the melon.
I think COPD is a lung condition. What is? I forgot. What the heck is it?
COPD is a lung condition.
But it's in a bunch of initials. It's like I forgot. But it's something to do with it's something to do with your brain getting bashed in like for your whole career, and you end up getting really bad symptoms later on in life. Well, if we were trying to construct like a utilitarian prescription for life on how to live the best life, maybe the utilitarian would say, don't be a football player, right?
Are you thinking of chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Yeah, there you go. Say it again.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE.
CTE. There you go. There you go. Yeah.
Well, encephalopathy is like the swelling of the brain.
Right. But basically, I don't know. I guess maybe rational people would say, don't play football, right? Don't be an NFL star because you might get this horrible condition that's going to completely deprive you of happiness. Remember, if utilitarianism is all about maximizing pleasure or happiness and minimizing pain, then it seems like the life of the football player would be off the table because of all the concussions. But you talk to some of these football players that even have this condition, and boxers, boxers get it as well. And they'll tell you, and maybe they're wrong, maybe utilitarians would say they're wrong and don't listen to their advice, but they'll tell you, I'll do it all over again. It was worth it. The amount of glory and pride and sense of accomplishment that I got when I was performing at the height of my career, that was amazing. And and it's worth the cost. It's worth the damage I did to my body. And who am I to tell them not to do? That's their life. I guess that would be sort of my argument, But to me, that kind of contradicts utilitarianism, kind of. I don't know.
I used to wrestle at SOU, and I think wrestling is like one of the, like, I definitely think football's hard. I think wrestling's really hard too, because like you are constantly touching somebody, someone is constantly pushing you down, hitting, like not hitting, but like kind of smacking you to the side, and then you're also having to worry about diet and cutting weight, and I think it's like, it sucks. It's a sucky sport. And I mean, I did it for half my life at one point, and it's like it was tough, but like the feeling of getting your hand raised at the end of the match is undescribable. And like you said, it's just worth it. Right. And like I'm gonna have chronic back problems. I broke my hand. I got compressed vertebrae now, and but again, I'd probably do it all over again, because like that feeling of all that hard work leading up to something, and it's not like a team sport like soccer, football, whatever. It is like just you. So I definitely think it's worth it. And I think that same with football players, they'll say it's worth winning that championship or something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I, again, who am I to take that away from them? There's a book, pretty recent. I want to say maybe 5 years old. It's not that old. There's a guy named Sam Harris, who's he's got a podcast. He's pretty controversial, actually, as outspoken atheist kind of guy. But he wrote a book. I think it's his most recent one. And I would say it's kind of a work of utilitarian ethics, although he says it's his own idea. It's kind of annoying. The guy has a degree in philosophy from Berkeley, and you wouldn't know from reading his books, because he acts like he's revolutionizing ethics and he's got the answer to all the questions, and us stupid philosophers never figured it out. But I hate to diss his book, but his sort of solution, he thinks that you can construct an ethics based on science and reason. And the way you do this, he says, is that everything is good that brings about well-being, and everything is bad that detracts from well-being. And so basically, science, he argues, can define well-being. We can use medicine to get us physically healthy. We can use psychology and psychiatry and therapy to get us mentally well. So these are scientific approaches that we can use to measure pleasure, pain, pros and cons, and then come to a scientific consensus on this is the good life, this is the bad life. But I think that's bullshit because of what you just said. According to this logic, you would have to say the wrestler is not living a good life because of the joint aching and the concussions and all that. And all he gets is one moment, or she, you get that one moment when they lift your hand up. Yeah, that was great, but it only lasted a moment. Think of all the months of training and all the, the pain and suffering. But again, like, who the hell are you to tell me what my best life is? And how do you know this? To me, that's not something you can answer in a sort of uniform, universal kind of way. And so I think Sam Harris is super naive.
It's not measurable. Like you can't.
It's not what?
Like you can't. It's not measurable.
Right.
Like the amount of work or like sweat and tears and blood, whatever that you put into something, you can't measure that and then measure the happiness that, like, the outcome of the happiness.
Yeah,
like,
I think
it's not measurable.
To me, this is my big issue with most of what is referred to in our contemporary philosophy departments as analytic philosophy. Analytic philosophers, for all their insights, a lot of them, and I hate to paint with such a broad brushstroke, but they all tend to see things very quantitatively, right? That you got to be able to measure it, has to be quantifiable. If you can't quantify it, it's just gibberish and bullshit. So, but it's like, I'm sorry, like, there are some things you just can't measure, like I love pizza, but I also love my mother. Could I put a number on the difference? Like I guess you could, like, put some neurons, like do a brain scan on me and look at my neural activity when I'm eating pizza versus my neural activity when I'm around my mother. But that won't really work either, because, like, when I eat pizza, I bet my brain is like, all the pleasure receptacles are going off when I eat the pizza. When I'm around my mom, sometimes she annoys me. So sometimes my brain might be like annoying signals, but I still love mom. If someone says you either got to live without pizza or live without mom, like, oh man, fuck, I'm gonna have to do without pizza. All right, obviously one matters more, but can I put a number on that? Could I measure it on a scale? There's some things that are beyond words or quantification. I think that utilitarians and ethicists that try to think in these, terms of outcomes and what's the best, and some of these things just can't be measured. They may be very subjective too, right? The feeling you get when you win the wrestling match, to someone else it might not be. Like, maybe there's some, like, giant, like Andre the Giant, who didn't even have to try. He just walks in there and wins the match. Like, he might not get as much sense of accomplishment out of it, right? So it's a very individual thing. And I think that's one of the problems with assuming that our opinion should be imposed on others, because it works so well for me. People do this with their diet a lot, like I went paleo for a while to lose a lot of weight, and it worked for me. But I remember people like, oh, you lose a lot of weight, you look good, what'd you do? And I did, oh, paleo doesn't work, vegan is the only way. Oh, vegan doesn't work, carnivore diet. It's like, everybody is like, it works for them, so they assume that it must work for everybody else. And sometimes I think they have good intentions. They work for them, they want everybody else to enjoy the benefits. But sometimes you have to keep in mind that what's the saying, what's good for the goose isn't always good for the gander, even though they might look the same. Anyway, we're almost out of time, so I better sort of go ahead and close it up. But does anybody have any comments, questions, anything you want to add to the debate? No? All right, well, let me stop recording.